Isabella sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of coffee in front of her. The steam rose lazily, curling into the morning air. Henry had already left for work, and the house was eerily quiet. The silence seemed to amplify her feelings of loneliness and neglect. Henry's job as an executive at a large corporation consumed most of his time and energy. He often came home late, tired and irritable. Their conversations had become superficial, limited to discussions about bills, household chores, and their son, Jason. The spark that once ignited their relationship had long since dimmed. Desperate for companionship and validation, Isabella found solace in her job as an executive assistant at a marketing firm. Her boss, James, was charming and attentive. He often stayed late at the office, and their shared dedication to their work created a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, after yet another argument with Henry, Isabella decided to stay late at the office to finish a project. James was there as usual, and he noticed her distress. "Is everything okay, Isabella?" James asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Isabella forced a smile. "Just the usual. Henry and I had another fight. It's nothing new." James nodded sympathetically. "I understand. Relationships can be tough. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." Isabella appreciated his kindness. "Thanks, James. That means a lot." As the night wore on, they continued to work side by side. The office was quiet, the only sounds the soft clicking of keyboards and the hum of the air conditioning. At some point, James suggested they take a break and have a drink in his office. Isabella hesitated, but agreed. They sat on the leather couch, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses between them. The alcohol loosened their inhibitions, and their conversation turned more personal. They talked about their dreams, fears, and the struggles they faced in their personal lives. "Sometimes I feel so alone," Isabella admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James reached out and took her hand. "You don't have to be alone, Isabella. I'm here for you." Their eyes locked, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. Before she knew it, James leaned in and kissed her. Isabella's mind screamed that it was wrong, but her body responded with a need that had been denied for too long. That night, they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Their affair began in secret, with stolen moments at the office and weekend getaways. Isabella felt alive again, but guilt gnawed at her. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to end it. The affair between Isabella and James continued in secret. They were careful, but the intensity of their connection made it hard to hide. Their stolen moments at the office, lunch dates, and weekend trips were exhilarating, but fraught with tension. Isabella felt a mixture of excitement and guilt. She loved the way James made her feel. Desired, important, and understood. But every time she returned home, the weight of her betrayal pressed down on her. Henry was still oblivious, but she knew it was only a matter of time before he noticed the changes in her behavior. One evening, after another heated argument with Henry, Isabella decided to stay late at the office. She needed to clear her head and escape the tension at home. James was there as usual, and he could tell something was wrong. "Rough night?" James asked, pouring them both a glass of wine. Isabella sighed, accepting the glass. "You could say that. Henry and I had another fight. I don't know how much more of this I can take." James reached out and touched her hand. "You deserve to be happy, Isabella. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Isabella looked into his eyes, feeling a rush of emotions. She knew she should end things with James, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. He was her escape, her sanctuary. As the weeks went by, Henry grew increasingly suspicious of Isabella's late nights and sudden secrecy. He noticed the way she avoided his gaze, the way she hesitated before answering his questions. He decided to take matters into his own hands. One evening, while Isabella was supposedly working late, Henry decided to visit her office. He parked his car down the street and approached the building, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anger. As he reached her office window, he saw a sight that confirmed his worst fears. Through the window, he saw Isabella and James locked in a passionate embrace. They were kissing, their bodies pressed close together. Henry felt a surge of rage and betrayal. He couldn't believe the woman he loved had betrayed him so deeply. Henry stormed away from the office, his mind racing. He needed to confront Isabella, but he didn't want to do it without concrete evidence. He decided to gather irrefutable proof of her infidelity. Determined to gather irrefutable evidence, Henry installed hidden cameras in Isabella's office. He spent hours researching the best equipment and meticulously planning where to place the cameras to capture everything. He knew it was a violation of privacy, but his anger and need for revenge overrode any moral qualms. The footage confirmed his worst fears. Isabella and James were indeed having an affair. He watched in anguish as they kissed, laughed, and shared intimate moments. Each frame was a dagger to his heart, but it also fueled his determination to make them pay. Armed with this evidence, Henry confronted Isabella one evening after she returned home from work. He waited until Jason was in bed before calling her into the living room. "Isabella, we need to talk," Henry said, his voice cold and controlled. Isabella felt a pang of fear. "What is it, Henry?" He showed her the footage from the hidden cameras. "Explain this." Isabella's face turned pale. She stammered, trying to find the words, but Henry cut her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You've betrayed me, and now you'll pay for it." Henry's mind was set on revenge. He couldn't let this betrayal go unpunished. He decided to take drastic measures to make Isabella and James suffer. Henry's first step was to confront James directly. He barged into James's office, throwing the evidence on his desk. James was taken aback, but he quickly composed himself, attempting to downplay the situation. "This isn't what it looks like, Henry," James began, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying his anxiety. Henry's rage boiled over. "Save it, James. I have all the proof I need. You and Isabella have made a fool of me, and now you'll both pay," he spat, his voice trembling with fury. James realized the severity of the situation. He knew his career and reputation were at stake. In a desperate attempt to salvage what he could, James offered Henry a deal. "Look, Henry, let's not do anything rash. We can work something out. I have connections, resources. Let's find a way to settle this quietly." Henry considered James's proposition, but his anger overrode any rational thought. He stormed out, vowing to bring both of them down. The days following the confrontation were a blur for Henry. He couldn't focus on anything except his plan for revenge. He spent sleepless nights plotting, his mind racing with thoughts of retribution. Isabella noticed the change in him. He was distant and cold, and she felt a growing sense of dread. She knew he had discovered the affair, but she didn't know the extent of his plans. One evening, as Henry sat brooding in the living room, Isabella approached him cautiously. "Henry, we need to talk." Henry looked up, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "There's nothing to talk about, Isabella. You've made your choices." Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes. "I know I hurt you, Henry. I'm so sorry. Please, let's try to work through this." Henry's expression hardened. "Work through this? You think a simple apology will fix everything? You've destroyed our marriage, Isabella." Isabella's shoulders slumped, and she felt a crushing sense of hopelessness. "What do you want from me, Henry?" "I want you to suffer, just like I have," Henry replied, his voice low and menacing. The next day, Henry reached out to Laura, his sister, who worked in the same building as James. Laura had always been close to Henry and was eager to help him expose James and Isabella. Laura met Henry at a coffee shop, and they discussed the plan in hushed tones. "We need to be smart about this, Laura. I want to ruin James and make sure Isabella feels the full weight of her actions." Laura nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes, Henry. Just tell me what you need." Together, they devised a plan to leak the footage to the company's board of directors and the media. They knew this would not only ruin James's career, but also humiliate Isabella publicly. Over the next few days, Laura discreetly distributed the footage, ensuring it reached the right people. She used her connections within the company to spread the scandal like wildfire. As the footage circulated, the company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. James was summoned and confronted with the evidence. The board members were outraged, and James could see his career crumbling before his eyes. "This is unacceptable, James. Your actions have brought disgrace to the company. You have no choice but to resign," the chairman declared, his voice filled with disdain. James knew he had no other option. He handed in his resignation, his mind reeling from the sudden downfall. As he packed his belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, not just from Henry, but from Isabella as well. Back at home, Isabella's world was falling apart. The scandal had become public knowledge, and she was the subject of gossip and ridicule. She felt trapped, ashamed, and utterly alone. One evening, as she sat in her bedroom, she received a call from James. "Isabella, we need to talk." Isabella hesitated, her heart pounding. "What is there to say, James? Everything is ruined." "I know, but we can't let Henry get away with this. We need to fight back," James insisted. Isabella felt a flicker of hope. "What do you suggest?" James outlined a plan to counteract Henry's actions. They would gather evidence of Henry's own indiscretions and use it to discredit him. It was a desperate move, but they had nothing left to lose. Over the next few days, Isabella and James worked together to gather the evidence they needed. They dug into Henry's past, looking for any skeletons in his closet. It was a challenging task, but they were determined to fight back. As they delved deeper, they discovered that Henry had been involved in some shady business deals. There were financial discrepancies and questionable transactions that could be used against him. Isabella felt a mix of emotions as they uncovered more dirt on Henry. She knew it was wrong to stoop to his level, but she was desperate to salvage what little remained of her life. One evening, as they were poring over documents, James looked at Isabella and said, "We need to make sure this doesn't destroy us completely. Whatever happens, we need to stick together." Isabella nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity with James. "You're right. We can't let Henry win." They compiled their findings and prepared to present them to the board and the media. It was a risky move, but they were willing to take the chance. Henry was oblivious to Isabella and James's counterplan. He continued with his own scheme, confident that he had the upper hand. He reached out to Mike, a close friend with underworld connections, to help him execute the final stages of his plan. Mike was a seasoned fixer, known for his ability to handle delicate situations. When Henry explained the situation, Mike agreed to help. "This is going to get messy, Henry. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Henry's resolve was unshaken. "Absolutely. They need to pay for what they've done." Mike set to work, Using his connections to gather information and resources, he arranged for a series of leaks that would further damage James's reputation and put pressure on his associates. The goal was to isolate James and make him an outcast in the business world. As the plan unfolded, James found himself increasingly cornered. His former allies turned their backs on him, and his financial stability was threatened. The pressure mounted, and James began to fear for his safety. One evening, as he sat in his now empty office, he received a call from Isabella. "James, it's getting worse. We need to act now." James's voice was strained. "I know, Isabella, we're almost out of time. We need to release the evidence we have on Henry." They agreed to move forward with their counterattack. The next day, they presented their findings to the board and the media. The evidence of Henry's financial misconduct and shady dealings sent shockwaves through the company. The media frenzy shifted its focus to Henry. Reporters camped outside his house, and his phone rang incessantly with calls from journalists and investigators. Henry felt the walls closing in on him. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room, Mike called. "Henry, we have a problem. The evidence Isabella and James released is causing a lot of trouble. We need to regroup." Henry was livid. "I don't care about the fallout. We need to finish what we started." Mike sighed. "I understand, but we need to be careful. This could blow up in our faces." As the pressure mounted, Henry's mental state began to deteriorate. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that everyone was out to get him. He lashed out at those around him, pushing away the few allies he had left. One evening, Laura visited Henry, concerned about his well-being. "Henry, you need to stop this. It's tearing you apart." Henry's eyes were wild with anger. "I can't stop, Laura. They need to pay for what they've done." Laura tried to reason with him. "Henry, look at what this is doing to you. You're losing yourself in this quest for revenge." Henry's expression softened momentarily, but his resolve quickly returned. "I have to see this through, Laura. It's the only way." The situation reached a boiling point when Henry decided to take matters into his own hands. He arranged a meeting with James, intending to confront him one last time. The meeting was set for a secluded location, away from prying eyes. As Henry drove to the meeting, his mind raced with thoughts of retribution. He arrived at the location and saw James waiting. The tension between them was palpable. "James," Henry began, his voice cold. "This ends now." James's expression was defiant. "You're right, Henry. This does end now." Before Henry could react, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down to see blood spreading across his shirt. James had a knife, and he had struck with the precision of a man desperate to protect himself. Henry stumbled back, clutching his side. You won't get away with this," he gasped. James's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I already have, Henry. This is self-defense." As Henry lay on the ground, bleeding and in pain, he realized the full extent of his actions. His quest for revenge had led him down a dark path, one from which there was no return. James called for help, and an ambulance arrived shortly after. Henry was rushed to the hospital, his condition critical. As he lay in the hospital bed, he reflected on the choices that had led him to this point. He had lost everything: his marriage, his career, and now, perhaps, his life. As the hospital staff worked to stabilize him, Henry's mind drifted through the chaos of the past months. The sound of monitors beeping and the flurry of activity around him seemed distant, almost surreal. Isabella, meanwhile, was dealing with her own turmoil. The scandal had taken a severe toll on her mental health. The constant barrage of phone calls and the harsh judgment from friends and colleagues made her feel like an outcast. She spent most of her days secluded in her apartment, avoiding the outside world. One afternoon, as she was flipping through the TV channels aimlessly, she came across a news report about Henry's stabbing. Her heart sank, and she felt an overwhelming wave of guilt and panic. Despite everything, she still cared for him. Isabella decided to visit Henry at the hospital. She needed to see him to understand the gravity of the situation. When she arrived, she was met with suspicious glances from the nurses and staff who were aware of the scandal. In the hospital room, Henry lay unconscious, connected to various machines. Isabella approached his bedside, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached out and gently touched his hand, feeling the coldness of his skin. "Henry, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted things to end up like this." As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, Laura entered the room. She was shocked to see Isabella, but quickly composed herself. "What are you doing here, Isabella?" Laura asked, her tone accusatory. Isabella turned to face Laura, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I had to see him, Laura. I needed to know if he was okay." Laura's expression softened slightly. "He's in a critical condition, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Isabella nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I wish I could take it all back." Laura sighed, her anger dissipating. "We all make mistakes, Isabella, but we have to live with the consequences." As Henry lay in the hospital bed, his mind drifted through a haze of memories. He saw flashes of his life with Isabella, the happy moments they had shared, and the painful ones that had led them to this point. He realized how much he had lost in his quest for revenge. Days turned into weeks, and Henry's condition slowly improved. He regained consciousness, but his recovery was slow and painful. The doctors informed him that he had narrowly escaped death, and it would be a long road to full recovery. During his time in the hospital, Henry had a lot of time to reflect. He thought about Isabella, their marriage, and the choices that had brought them to this point. He realized that his quest for revenge had consumed him, turning him into someone he barely recognized. Meanwhile, James was facing his own demons. The stabbing had been a desperate act of self-defense, but it haunted him. He knew that he had crossed a line and that there would be consequences. The legal battles that followed were draining, both emotionally and financially. James's relationship with Tom had also deteriorated. Tom felt betrayed by James's actions and distanced himself from the family. The once close bond between the brothers was shattered, and it seemed unlikely they would ever reconcile. As Henry recovered, he received an unexpected visitor, Mike. Mike had been instrumental in Henry's plan for revenge, but he had seen the toll it had taken on his friend. "Henry, we need to talk," Mike said, his voice serious. Henry nodded, motioning for Mike to sit down. "What is it, Mike?" Mike looked at Henry, his expression filled with concern. "This has to stop, Henry. You've lost everything, and this quest for revenge is only destroying you further." Henry sighed, feeling a sense of resignation. "I know, Mike. I just don't know how to let go." Mike leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You need to find a way to move on, Henry. Holding on to this anger will only consume you." Henry nodded, knowing that Mike was right. "I just don't know where to start." As Henry continued to recover, he began to take steps towards rebuilding his life. He attended therapy sessions to deal with his anger and resentment. He reached out to old friends, trying to reconnect with the people he had pushed away. Isabella, too, was on a path to redemption. She sought counseling to address her own issues and started to rebuild her relationship with Jason. She knew it would take time, but she was determined to make amends for her mistakes. Henry decided to take a different approach. He reached out to Laura, his sister, who worked in the same building as James. Laura had always been close to Henry and was eager to help him expose James and Isabella. Together, they devised a plan to leak the footage to the company's board of directors and the media. They knew this would not only ruin James's career, but also humiliate Isabella publicly. The plan was set in motion. Laura discreetly distributed the footage, and soon it became the talk of the office. The scandalous affair was splashed across newspapers and websites, causing a media frenzy. James was forced to resign, and Isabella's reputation was in tatters. Henry watched with grim satisfaction as their lives unraveled. As the footage circulated, the company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. James was summoned and confronted with the evidence. The board members were outraged, and James could see his career crumbling before his eyes. "This is unacceptable, James. Your actions have brought disgrace to the company. You have no choice but to resign," the chairman declared, his voice filled with disdain. James knew he had no other option. He handed in his resignation, his mind reeling from the sudden downfall. As he packed his belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, not just from Henry, but from Isabella as well. Back at home, Isabella's world was falling apart. The scandal had become public knowledge, and she was the subject of gossip and ridicule. She felt trapped, ashamed, and utterly alone. One evening, as she sat in her bedroom, she received a call from James. "Isabella, we need to talk." Isabella hesitated, her heart pounding. "What is there to say, James? Everything is ruined." "I know, but we can't let Henry get away with this. We need to fight back," James insisted. Isabella felt a flicker of hope. "What do you suggest?" James outlined a plan to counteract Henry's actions. They would gather evidence of Henry's own indiscretions and use it to discredit him. It was a desperate move, but they had nothing left to lose. Over the next few days, Isabella and James worked together to gather the evidence they needed. They dug into Henry's past, looking for any skeletons in his closet. It was a challenging task, but they were determined to fight back. As they delved deeper, they discovered that Henry had been involved in some shady business deals. There were financial discrepancies and questionable transactions that could be used against him. Isabella felt a mix of emotions as they uncovered more dirt on Henry. She knew it was wrong to stoop to his level, but she was desperate to salvage what little remained of her life. One evening, as they were poring over documents, James looked at Isabella and said, "We need to make sure this doesn't destroy us completely. Whatever happens, we need to stick together." Isabella nodded, feeling a sense of solidarity with James. "You're right. We can't let Henry win." They compiled their findings and prepared to present them to the board and the media. It was a risky move, but they were willing to take the chance. As the pressure mounted, Henry's mental state began to deteriorate. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that everyone was out to get him. He lashed out at those around him, pushing away the few allies he had left. One evening, Laura visited Henry, concerned about his well-being. "Henry, you need to stop this. It's tearing you apart." Henry's eyes were wild with anger. "I can't stop, Laura. They need to pay for what they've done." Laura tried to reason with him. "Henry, look at what this is doing to you. You're losing yourself in this quest for revenge." Henry's expression softened momentarily, but his resolve quickly returned. "I have to see this through, Laura. It's the only way." The situation reached a boiling point when Henry decided to take matters into his own hands. He arranged a meeting with James, intending to confront him one last time. The meeting was set for a secluded location, away from prying eyes. As Henry drove to the meeting, his mind raced with thoughts of retribution. He arrived at the location and saw James waiting. The tension between them was palpable. "James," Henry began, his voice cold. "This ends now." James's expression was defiant. "You're right, Henry. This does end now." Before Henry could react, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down to see blood spreading across his shirt. James had a knife, and he had struck with the precision of a man desperate to protect himself. Henry stumbled back, clutching his side. You won't get away with this," he gasped. James's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I already have, Henry. This is self-defense." As Henry lay on the ground, bleeding and in pain, he realized the full extent of his actions. His quest for revenge had led him down a dark path, one from which there was no return. James quickly called for help, fearing the repercussions of his actions. An ambulance arrived and rushed Henry to the hospital. James, filled with dread, knew that this incident would have far-reaching consequences. While Henry was being treated, the police arrived to question James. He explained the situation as self-defense, providing the necessary context for his actions. The police took his statement, but he knew an investigation would follow, and he would need a lawyer to defend his case. As news of the stabbing spread, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters camped outside the hospital and James's home, seeking statements and speculating on the events. Henry's condition was critical, and his recovery was uncertain. Isabella, upon hearing the news, was devastated. Despite everything, she still cared for Henry and couldn't bear the thought of losing him. She rushed to the hospital, her heart heavy with guilt and fear. When she arrived, she found Laura in the waiting room, her face etched with worry. They exchanged a brief, tense glance before Laura spoke. "He's in surgery. They don't know if he'll make it," Laura said, her voice trembling. Isabella felt a lump in her throat. "I never wanted this to happen, Laura. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." Laura nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "None of us did, but here we are." As Henry fought for his life in the operating room, Isabella and Laura sat in the waiting room, reflecting on the series of events that had brought them to this point. They both knew that their actions had set off a chain reaction of pain and suffering. Hours later, a doctor emerged, looking somber but hopeful. "Henry is stable for now. He's still critical, but we've managed to stop the bleeding. The next 24 hours are crucial." Isabella and Laura breathed a sigh of relief, though their relief was tempered by the gravity of the situation. They knew that even if Henry survived, their lives would never be the same. In the days that followed, Henry remained in intensive care, drifting in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he was filled with regret and a deep sense of loss. He realized that his quest for revenge had cost him everything. Isabella visited Henry every day, hoping for a chance to speak with him. She wanted to apologize, to try and make amends for the pain she had caused. One evening, as she sat by his bedside, Henry opened his eyes and looked at her. "Isabella," he whispered, his voice weak. Isabella leaned in, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm here, Henry. I'm so sorry for everything." Henry's eyes softened, and he managed a faint smile. "I know, Bella, I know. We both made mistakes." As Henry recovered, he and Isabella had many difficult conversations. They talked about their past, their mistakes, and the path forward. They both knew that their marriage was beyond repair, but they wanted to find a way to coexist peacefully for the sake of their son, Jason. Henry also reached out to James, seeking closure. They met in a neutral location, their animosity replaced by a mutual understanding of the damage they had done to each other. "James," Henry began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I'm not here to fight. I just want to understand why things went so wrong." James sighed, his expression weary. "We let our emotions get the better of us, Henry. We made decisions in moments of weakness, and it led to all of this." They talked for hours, airing their grievances and acknowledging their mistakes. By the end of the conversation, they both felt a sense of closure, though the wounds would take time to heal. As the weeks turned into months, Henry focused on rebuilding his life. He attended therapy sessions to deal with his anger and resentment. He reconnected with old friends and began to rebuild his career, albeit in a different field. Isabella, too, sought counseling and worked on repairing her relationship with Jason. She knew it would take time, but she was committed to making amends for her action. Laura and Tom, despite the rocky start, decided to give their relationship a chance for the sake of their unborn child. They faced many challenges, but they were determined to build a future together. As Henry and Isabella navigated their paths to healing, James found himself facing the legal repercussions of his actions. The investigation into the stabbing incident was thorough, and James hired a skilled lawyer to defend him. The courtroom was tense as the trial unfolded. Both sides presented their cases, and the jury was left to decide whether James had acted in self-defense or if his actions were premeditated. The media coverage was relentless, and the public was divided on the issue. In the end, James was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, but the trial had taken a significant toll on him. His reputation was in shambles, and he struggled to find work in his field. He decided to move to a different city, hoping for a fresh start. Meanwhile, Laura faced her own challenges. She had resigned from her job, unable to face her colleagues after the scandal. She focused on her pregnancy and her relationship with Tom, hoping to create a stable environment for their child. One evening, as Laura and Tom were preparing for the baby's arrival, Laura received a call from an old friend. The friend had information about Henry's involvement in the scandal that had not yet been revealed. Laura listened intently, her heart pounding. The information could change everything, but it also meant reopening old wounds. She decided to confront Henry, hoping for honesty and closure. Laura met Henry at a quiet cafe, her expression serious. "Henry, we need to talk. I received some information that I think you need to hear." Henry looked at her, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "What is it, Laura?" Laura took a deep breath. "I know about your involvement with Mike and the lengths you went to destroy James. I have proof." Henry's face paled. "Laura, I never meant for things to go that far. I was blinded by anger and hurt." Laura's eyes softened. "I understand, Henry, but you need to take responsibility for your actions. We all do." Henry nodded, feeling a sense of resignation. "You're right, Laura. I've made so many mistakes, and I need to make things right." Henry decided to come clean about his actions. He contacted the authorities and provided them with the information about his involvement with Mike and the plot to destroy James. The confession was a turning point for Henry, a step towards redemption. The authorities launched an investigation, and Mike was arrested for his role in the scheme. The media coverage of the scandal resurfaced, but this time it focused on Henry's attempt to make amends. As the dust settled, Henry felt a sense of relief. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was determined to rebuild his life with honesty and integrity. He continued his therapy sessions and focused on his relationship with Jason, hoping to be a better father. Isabella, too, found a sense of peace. She had faced her demons and was committed to creating a stable environment for Jason. She started a new job and slowly rebuilt her social life, finding support in her friends and family. Laura and Tom welcomed their baby girl, Emily, into the world. They faced many challenges, but they were committed to creating a loving home for their daughter. Laura found a new job and focused on building a future with Tom. Years later, the scars of betrayal and revenge remained, but the characters had found a way to move forward. Henry and Isabella had moved on, but the memory of their actions lingered. The price of infidelity and revenge had been steep, leaving a trail of broken relationships and lost happiness. Henry had rebuilt his life, finding a new sense of purpose in his work and his relationship with Jason. He had learned to let go of his anger and focus on creating a positive future. He continued to attend therapy, knowing that healing was a lifelong journey. Isabella had found a new job and a new sense of self. She had built a network of supportive friends and had repaired her relationship with Jason. She knew that the past would always be a part of her, but she was determined not to let it define her. Laura and Tom had created a loving home for Emily. They faced many challenges, but their commitment to each other and their daughter gave them strength. Laura found fulfillment in her new job and in being a mother. James, having moved to a new city, had started over. He found work in a different field and slowly rebuilt his life. He knew that he could never fully escape the past, but he was determined to create a better future. If you like our stories, please subscribe to our channel so that I can push better stories.